When I first started learning photography and how to edit, specifically in Lightroom, I wish there was a guide that would just list out all the terms, kind of what the term is, the definition, how to use it, and why it's important. So with that being said, I decided to create this guide, and particularly for beginners, but even if you're like an amateur editor, I'm sure you can get some value out of this guide. So let's get into it. So starting off, we have the histogram. The histogram is a graphical representation of tonal values in your image. It displays the distribution of tones and the frequency of each tone in the image. It goes from pure black on the left side to pure white on the right side. You use the histogram to understand the overall exposure and tonal range in your image. If your histogram is skewed to the left, like we can see in this image where it's a little darker, so if it's skewed to the left, then you know your image may be underexposed, and if you see it skewed to the right, then you know your image may be overexposed. So moving on to editing the blacks in your image. So the blacks in your image are the darkest parts of your image. They exist on the very left side of the histogram, and you can also edit them down here. To identify if you're losing detail in the darkest parts of your image, if the histogram is touching or bunched up against the left edge, it might mean those areas are clipped and have no detail. Like we can see in this example here, in the very dark parts here, you can see that it's clipping, and then if you just move it to the right a bit, you can see how it lifts up and gets lighter. Next up, we have the shadows, which are the second most darkest parts of your image. They exist between your midtones and the blacks in your histogram. The midtones in your image exist in the very middle of your histogram. These are the tonal ranges between your shadows and your highlights. You'll often find these tones control your subject's skin tone, and if you want to assess the overall balance and contrast in your image, then adjusting the midtones is a great way to make a profound effect on your image's mood and depth. The highlights in your image are the second brightest values in the histogram, and they exist on the right side. They are in between the midtones and the whites. You'll often find highlights control sunbeams, sunlight in an image, etc. So for example, taking a look at this image, right, we have a bright sun in there, so the highlights are really bright. If I move it to the left, it controls the sunshine. The whites in your image are the brightest values on your histogram, and they exist on the very right side. To identify if you're losing detail in the brightest parts of your image. If the histogram is touching or bunched up against the right edge, it might mean those areas are blown out. So for example, if I bump up the exposure all the way, you can see that the whites are now clipping, and this lets you know the image is overexposed. The white balance in your image refers to the color temperature of your image. The white balance ensures that you perceive the white in the image as it appears in real life. It essentially compensates for the color temperature of your light source, ensuring the colors in your image are consistent and accurate. You'll want to change the white balance in order to correct color casts in your photos. And different light sources such as sunlight, tungsten lights, fluorescent lights, etc. can add color tints to your image. So adjusting your white balance accordingly will ensure your photo has a natural color tone, setting a nice foundation for the rest of your edits. As you can see here, you can set it to as shot, auto, and custom. The white balance select tool is a tool that allows you to select a neutral gray point in your image to automatically adjust the white balance. So if you're unsure of the correct white balance in your image, this is a great tool to use. And all you have to do is select a neutral gray area in your image, and this tool will adjust the image, giving you a good starting point. It's particularly useful when you have a known neutral gray point in your scene, like if you're using a gray card. So all you do is you select it, and let's say this was the neutral gray in my scene. If I click on it, then it'll adjust the whole image to the correct white balance of the scene. The temperature in your image refers to the warmth or coolness in your image. If you move the slider towards the blue side, which is the left, it makes your image cooler. And if you move the slider towards the yellow side, it makes it warmer. This has a profound effect on the mood of your image, as cooler images often represent moodier, colder, and calmer images, whereas warmer images often represent happiness, comfort, or caution. If your image appears too blue, which is cool, or too orange, which is warm, then adjust the temperature. Then adjusting the temperature can help neutralize the color cast. And this slider is often adjusted based on personal style as well, or aesthetic, to help you create a certain mood if you're in your scene. Like if you're going for more moody, you might make it more on the blue side. If you're going for a more warm, happy aesthetic, then you might adjust it to be more warm. The tint adjusts the balance between green and magenta in your image. You can use the tint in conjunction with the temperature to control and balance out any green or magenta color cast in your image. For example, some fluorescent lights can sometimes introduce a greenish cast, which can be neutralized if you adjust the tint control. Similar to the temperature slider, you can also adjust the tint to be more green or magenta based on your personal style. The profiles in Lightroom provide you with a quick and easy starting point for your processing and determine how colors and tonality get rendered in your photos. You can see here you can adjust the different colors, the different profiles, and there are different ones that you can add in, such as artistic ones, and you can play around with them here. The exposure slider controls the brightness of your entire image. You'll want to use this slider while looking at your histogram to adjust an overexposed or too bright of an image, or underexposed, too dark of an image. So going back to this example, that was underexposed. If we adjust the, if we increase the exposure, I'm not looking at the histogram because I want to brighten it up, then you're constantly looking between the exposure and also your histogram just to see how your tonal ranges are doing. If you're going for a moodier look, some people like to purposely underexpose their image, and some people like to also purposely overexpose their image if they're going for a more like light and airy, dreamy look. The contrast slider controls the difference between the darkest and lightest parts of your image. You'll want to use this slider to increase the visual difference between the light and dark areas. I think giving your image more punch if you push it towards the right side by increasing the contrast, or to soften your image by reducing the contrast. Once again here, this is often sometimes used as a personal style to get a certain creative aesthetic, whether you want more of that kind of soft look or more of that punchy look. The texture slider enhances or reduces the appearance of texture in your image without affecting overall sharpness. Essentially, it brings out or smooths out medium-sized details. You'll want to use this slider when you want to increase prominent features like skin, bark, hair, or to soften and smoothen out those same features without losing finer details. The clarity slider increases or decreases your mid-tone contrast, which can add depth to your image. You want to use this slider when you want to accentuate details or give your image a more punchy look, especially useful in landscape or urban scenes. If you reduce the clarity, then you can create a dreamy soft focus effect that's sometimes preferred for portraits, and light and airy edits, kind of for that summer haze look, as you can see here when I drag it to the left. The Dehaze slider reduces or adds atmospheric haze to your image that works on both light and colors in your image. You'll want to use this slider when you want to cut through some atmospheric haze in your images, such as if you have a landscape photo, or if you want to add some creative fog or a hazy look. Just be careful when using this slider, as making strong adjustments, as you can see here, can introduce color shifts. The Vibrance slider adjusts the intensity of the more muted colors in your image without significantly affecting the already well-saturated colors in your image. It boosts saturation where it's needed the most. This slider is particularly useful when you want to make certain colors in your image pop without oversaturating the entire image. For example, you can use this slider in portraits when you want to enhance the skin tones without making them look unnatural, as you can see here when I bumped it up. The saturation slider uniformly increases or decreases the intensity of all the colors in your image. You'll want to use the saturation slider when you want to enhance or reduce the overall color intensity in your image. Oversaturating can create an unnatural looking image, so just be careful of that, as you can see here. Oversaturating or desaturating can also create a personal style or aesthetic. For example, oversaturating a bit along with softening the clarity slider can create that dreamy summer haze look, while desaturating the image can make it a little bit more moodier. The tone curve is a graphic representation of the tones in your image. The horizontal axis represents the input tones from shadows to highlights, or blacks to whites as well, and the vertical axis represents your output tones. By adjusting the curve, you can change the relationship between the input and output tones. You'll want to adjust the tone curve when you want to make precise adjustments to the luminosity of specific tonal regions in your image, like lifting shadows or darkening highlights. The parametric curve is a subsection of the tone curve, and it provides an alternative way for you to modify your tonal range using sliders. This curve lets you adjust the tonal range of an image using predefined regions like highlights, lights, darks, and shadows. It uses sliders to increase or decrease the tonal values within those regions. You'll find it useful if you find the point curve too intricate, or for times when you just want to make some quick adjustments to specific tonal ranges without affecting others. The point curve is kind of like the classic tone curve, and it's another subsection of the tone curve, and allows you to click and add points into the curve directly and adjust specific tonal ranges by dragging these points. For precise control over tonal adjustments, you can create S curves for contrast, lift the blacks for a faded look, or make other custom tonal adjustments. The linear curve is the default state of the tone curve, where it's a straight diagonal line from bottom left, the blacks, to the top right, the whites. The tonality of the image is unchanged in this state. An S curve is a classic and common shape made on the tone curve that makes it look like an S. This shape adds contrast to the image by darkening the shadows, by bringing them down, while brightening the highlights. If you want to add contrast to your image in a more controlled manner than just the basic contrast slider, then this is a great way to do it. The hue refers to the type or shade of a color. In the context of photo editing, adjusting the hue means changing a color to a different color, like changing the reds here to be more on the pink side or on the orange side. The hue sliders exist for every major color, such as red, orange, yellow, green, aqua, blue, purple, and magenta. You want to use the hue sliders when you want to subtly or dramatically shift the shades of a specific color in your image. For example, making your greens look more teal, or adjusting your subject's skin tones by tweaking the orange and the red sliders. The saturation refers to the intensity or purity of a color. Increasing the saturation makes your colors more vibrant, while decreasing it makes the image color more muted. The saturation sliders exist for every major color and allow you to adjust your image's saturation levels. You'll want to adjust these sliders when you want to emphasize or reduce the intensity of specific colors in your image. For example, enhancing the blue in a sky, or reducing the saturation of overly vibrant greens in a landscape. The color luminance. So the luminance of a color refers to the brightness or darkness of a color. Increasing the luminance makes your colors more bright, while decreasing it, the luminance makes the colors darker. For example, you can lighten skin tones by adjusting the luminance of the orange and red sliders, and the brightness of the sky by adjusting the blue and the teal sliders. The color wheels exist within the color grading panel, and there are 3 color wheels in this panel: the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights. Each wheel lets you add specific color tones to its corresponding tonal range in the image. You'll want to adjust these color wheels when you want to apply color casts or specific corrections to a tonal area. For example, you might want to add a cool blue tint to the shadows, while warming up orange highlights for a cinematic look. Underneath each color wheel, there are luminance sliders that will adjust the brightness or darkness of the chosen color grade. For example, adding a blue tint to the shadows, you might want to darken the effect for a deeper and moodier tone. The blending slider controls how the color adjustments between the shadows and highlights blend together, affecting the width of the tones. You'll want to use the blending slider when you want to refine how the shadow and highlight adjustments interact. A higher value will make the colors in the shadow and highlight regions affect a broader range of midtones, while a lower value will keep them more isolated. The balance slider adjusts the balance between the shadows and highlights color grading, essentially shifting the midpoint of the tonal range. You'll want to use the balance slider if you feel the color grade on the shadows is overpowering, or vice versa. You can use the balance slider to also shift emphasis. So a positive value will give more weight to the highlights adjustments, and a negative value will emphasize the shadow adjustments. Sharpening is a technique that highlights the edges and fine details in your image. The sharpening amount controls the intensity of the sharpening effect. You'll want to adjust the sharpening amount to increase or decrease the overall sharpness applied to your image. Usually some sharpening is applied to most digital images to counteract the inherent softness of the image. The sharpening radius determines the size of the details the sharpening will target. This radius essentially adjusts the width of the edges that will be sharpened. You'll want to use a smaller radius of around 0.5 to 1 for images with finer details, and you'll want to use a larger radius like 1.5 or more for broader edges and details. So as you can see here, I'm sticking with 1.0. The sharpening detail controls how much high frequency information is sharpened in the image, affecting the finer textures. So you'll want to use a higher value to enhance fine textures and details, while lower values will sharpen large edges, leaving finer textures unchanged. The sharpening masking determines which parts of your image get sharpened. Moving the masking slider to the right will gradually exclude areas of uniform color and tone from the sharpening process. You'll want to use this masking to avoid sharpening noise or areas that don't need it, such as smooth skies that you want to keep smooth. As a pro tip, you'll want to hold down the Alt key on Windows or Option on Mac while dragging this slider to provide a visual representation in black and white of where the sharpening is being applied. Now onto noise reduction. So noise is a random variation in the image signal and often appears as dots or speckles in your image. It can be caused by a number of factors such as poor lighting, high ISO settings, long exposure times, and heat. The noise reduction luminance reduces the grayscale noise. You'll want to use a slider when there's noise in the image that pertains to differences in brightness, especially common in images shot at high ISO settings or under low light. The noise reduction luminance details preserves the detail when applying luminance noise reduction. So a higher value will preserve more details, but might also keep some noise when you increase the noise reduction, and a lower value might remove the noise, but also some image detail. So you'll want to use this slider in order to strike a balance between noise reduction and detail preservation. So the noise reduction color reduces color noise, which will manifest itself as random red, green, and blue pixels. You want to use this when there's visible color noise, especially in the shadows or in images taken at high ISO settings. Noise reduction color detail adjusts the color noise threshold. Higher values will preserve more color details but can also leave color noise, while lower values will remove color noise. I've noticed it can also reduce some color details, so just be careful of that. Noise reduction color smoothness enhances the smoothness of color transitions, so you want to use this slider to ensure a smooth gradation of colors. This is particularly useful in areas like skies where you want to maintain a natural and noise-free gradient. So I always just best recommend when dealing with these, just zoom into the photo and then adjust it with the sliders here. Just zoom in and play around with these sliders when you have an image with lots of noise and just keep fine-tuning it. Profile corrections apply automatic corrections to an image based on the camera and lens profile that Lightroom detects. You want to enable profile corrections when you want Lightroom to auto-detect your lens and apply corrections based on known profiles. These corrections typically correct for distortion, vignetting, and chromatic aberration inherent to your specific lens. The lens profile is the lens Lightroom has detected that you use to capture your image. So Lightroom has a database of many lens profiles and will typically auto-detect the correct one if the EXIF data in the photo includes this information. This will automatically be added if you enable profile corrections, but in cases where Lightroom doesn't automatically detect your lens, then you can manually apply the profile of a different lens. The distortion profile correction slider in the profile corrections panel allows you to manually adjust the levels of the lens distortion, which can range from barrel distortion, which is bulging outward, or to pincushion distortion, which is pinching inward. So you'll want to adjust this slider if the automatic profile correction doesn't fully correct the distortion, or if you wish to add some distortion for a creative look. The vignetting profile correction slider adjusts the level of correction for vignetting, which is the darkening of the corners of your image. You'll want to adjust this slider when the corners of your image are either too dark, or due to lens vignetting, or if they're too light from overcorrection. And similar to the distortion, you'll mostly just adjust this if the automatic profile corrections didn't get it, or you just want to add some extra tweaks. The manual corrections allow you to make manual corrections to your lens profile. So the distortion slider is similar to what we mentioned earlier, but they're just kind of a lot stronger with the barrel and the pincushion. The defringe here, so chromatic aberration, often seen as color fringes along the edges of high contrast subjects, can be corrected using the defringe controls. So for example, looking sometimes if you have a lens at the edges here, you will see some fringing. Not so much in this image, but by adjusting the amount of it, you can see that it changes the edges of the petal there. So transform lets you adjust the perspective and alignment of your image. So upright modes are automatic and semi-automatic perspective correction options. So you have 6 here. You have off, auto, guided, level, vertical, and full. So the auto upright mode analyzes the image and automatically applies a balanced level of perspective correction. You'll select this mode when you want a quick fix for noticeable perspective issues without getting into manual adjustments. The guided upright mode allows you to draw up to 4 lines in your image, indicating which line should be vertical or horizontal. Lightroom then adjusts the image based on these guides. For example, this is useful for images where you need more control over the correction, like when aligning the sides of a building or the horizon, and not necessarily in a portrait like this. The level upright mode corrects only for the level or the horizontal axis of your image. You'll use this if the image is tilted to the side and you want to level the horizon or another reference line. The vertical upright mode corrects only for the vertical perspective. This is great for images where vertical lines, like the sides of buildings, appear to converge due to the tilt of the camera. Full upright mode applies both horizontal and vertical perspective corrections. You'll want to use this mode when both the level and vertical perspectives need adjusting. This can sometimes lead to aggressive corrections, so it's best to check if the results look natural. We already touched a little bit on vignetting, but we'll dive into the post-crop vignetting. So post-crop vignetting darkens or lightens the corners of the image, which can be used to draw attention towards the center or give photos a specific mood. So the amount controls the strength and direction of the vignette. A positive value lightens the corner while a negative value darkens them. You'll want to use this to emphasize the subject in the center of your frame or to create a vintage or moody feel. The vignetting midpoint determines how far the vignette spreads towards the center of your image. You can adjust this based on the size and position of the main subject to ensure your vignette complements it effectively. The roundness slider adjusts the shape of your vignette from a circle, which is positive values, to a rectangle, which is more negative values. You want to use this depending on your composition. For example, you might want to add a more rounded or squared off vignette effect depending on your style and what you photographed. The vignetting feather controls the transition between the vignette and the center of your image. Higher values create a smoother transition. For a soft, subtle vignette, increase the feathering, and for a more defined and dramatic effect, decrease it. The vignetting highlights, so this slider protects the highlights within the vignette area, allowing them to shine through even if the edges are darkened significantly. I found this is useful in scenarios when you want the vignette effect but don't want to lose highlight details like a sunset near the edge of the frame. So as you can see here, adjusting it to the right keeps the highlights. Diving into grain. So grain is a textured filmic-like quality added to photos that can be seen as speckles. The grain amount slider controls the intensity of the grain effect. You want to use this slider when you want to introduce a film grain texture or a pronounced gritty effect, depending on your personal style and preference. The grain size slider adjusts the size of the individual grain particles. Depending on the desired effect, you can opt for fine grain, resembling the higher quality film stocks by keeping a smaller size, or a coarse grain, mimicking lower quality or more artistic film types. Grain roughness changes the uniformity and distribution of the grain, so higher values make the grain more uneven and clumpy, while lower values provide a more uniform distribution. You want to use the slider to achieve a specific aesthetic, either a more random and natural grain or a smoother, more consistent texture. Calibration is often referred to as the camera calibration in Lightroom and lets you adjust the color interpretation of your image. So while it's a more advanced tool, it's invaluable for photographers who want to achieve specific color grading looks or correct for certain color shifts that may arise from your camera sensor. So the calibration process, this is a dropdown that refers to the underlying algorithms and processing engine that Lightroom uses to develop photos. Over the years, Adobe has released new process versions with enhancements and changes in how image data is interpreted. So I don't recommend selecting a different one from the default, because it's generally recommended to just use the latest process version. Moving back up to the top, we have the crop tool. So the crop tool allows you to trim or reshape your image to improve composition, eliminate distractions, or fit specific aspect ratios. You'll want to use the crop tool whenever you want to change the boundaries of your photo, emphasize certain elements, or fit a particular format like Instagram's square format. The aspect ratio is the ratio of width to height in the cropped area of your image. So Lightroom provides presets like 1:1, which is square, 4:5, 16:9, etc. Depending on your final output, whether it's for print, web, a social media platform, you might need to conform to certain aspect ratios. The spot healing tool is a healing tool that allows you to remove unwanted blemishes, spots, or objects from your image. So you have different options here. You have the heal, you have content aware remove, and you have clone. So the clone option duplicates one part of your image onto another, while the heal blends the selected area with surrounding pixels. You want to use this tool to clean up distractions like sensor dust, skin blemishes, or unwanted objects in the scene. Choose heal for a more seamless blend and clone for a direct copy. In the content aware remove, you just hover over the section and it'll try to fix it. It'll remove the blemish or the scar that the subject has. The red eye correction tool identifies and corrects the red eye effect. I found this tool useful for portraits taken with flash, especially in low light conditions where pupils are dilated, leading to the red eye effect. Masking refers to the method of selecting specific parts of an image for isolated adjustments, and in Lightroom, this concept has been expanded and enhanced. So the brush masking allows you to paint over areas of your image when you want specific adjustments to apply. You'll want to use this tool when you want to make localized adjustments to specific parts of your image, such as brightening a face or enhancing the saturation of a sky. The gradient masking tools like linear gradient and radial gradient, these tools apply adjustments gradually over a region. The linear gradient affects a strip of the image, while the radial gradient affects an elliptical area. These tools are useful for scenarios like darkening the sky or creating a vignette or a spotlight effect. And then you have color and luminance range masking. So these two allow you to refine your masks based on color or brightness. For example, using the color here, you can adjust the color ranges. It's only affecting the color. And the luminance range masks only affects the luminance of where you select it. Now moving on to the flagging system. So a flag is used to quickly identify and categorize photos. Images can be flagged as flagged, unflagged, and rejected. So flagging is useful during the initial review process. Flagging can help you quickly sort through a shoot and keep the best shots, which you would flag, and marking the ones to be deleted or ignored, which you can set as rejected. The star rating system in Lightroom allows you to assign a rating of 1 to 5 stars to an image, and all you do is select an image and you select it either 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 on your keyboard. And I found this system valuable for ranking photos based on quality, importance, or any other criteria, aiding in the organization and the culling process. So if you head to the library module and then you go to metadata, so metadata is the information that describes various attributes of your photo, such as the camera used, the lens used, exposure settings, the date taken, copyright info, and more. Reviewing the metadata can help you understand shooting conditions, organize photos, or filter them based on specific criteria. So if you really liked a photo, for example, you can look at the exposure settings so you can understand how to recreate and take that photo for next time, or just kind of study why something turned out well or why it didn't. And also for the metadata, if you head to library and grid view and then select metadata, you can also see all the images filtered by cameras and lenses and the label easily here. Now moving on to collections. So collections are virtual groupings of photos that can be organized by theme, project, or any other criteria. Unlike folders, a single photo can exist in multiple collections without duplicating the actual file. So you'll want to group photos from different folders or shoots together based on thematic or project-based criteria. And all you do here is you go to collections and you can create a new collection, and you can add photos to collections as well. And I like to just drag them into the specific collection. And then you can also remove them from collection easily. So for example, I have collections based on different cameras and different lenses that I've used. A snapshot is a saved state of all the adjustments made to an image at a particular point in time. This is useful if you want to create a reference point or experiment with different editing directions on a single image without losing previous adjustments. The history in Adobe Lightroom is a list that records every adjustment made to your image since it was imported in Lightroom. This is useful to track or revert to a previous state of editing. A virtual copy is a non-destructive duplicate of an image that allows for different edits without affecting the original. You want to use this when you want to create multiple versions of an image, for example, one in black and white and one in color, without duplicating the actual file. Now moving on to sync. So sync in Lightroom is a feature that allows you to apply the same edits from one photo to multiple photos. So you would just select multiple photos. So you edit the first photo and then you make an adjustment. You select the other photos and then you would just hit sync. And then you check all what you want to synchronize and you just hit sync. And then it adjusts all the photos to the edits that you made in the first one. This is useful when editing a batch of photos taken under similar conditions to ensure consistent post-processing. So next up we have smart previews. So smart previews are smaller stand-in files of your photos that allow you to edit images even when the original files aren't connected to Lightroom. So essentially, like if you want to outsource your photos for editing, then smart previews and Lightroom allow you to edit images that are not physically connected to your computer. And the smart preview files are lightweight, smaller file formats based on a lossy DNG file format. And you can build smart previews by going to library, previews, and building smart previews. So they're basically like mini versions of your raw files, but you won't be losing any quality. Next we have presets. So Lightroom presets are safe settings that can be applied to photos with a single click. They can range from simple adjustments like exposure boosts to complex color grading. They're useful for speeding up the editing process or achieve a consistent look across multiple photos. Tethered Capture is when you're shooting with your camera directly connected to Lightroom, and this allows photos to be imported instantly into the software as they're taken. It's useful in studio settings or when immediate review and editing of photos are necessary. Next up we have keywords, and keywords are descriptive or identifying words added to photo metadata to make searching and organization more efficient. They're useful when you want to categorize, search, and manage your photos more effectively, especially in large catalogs. You can enter custom keywords, and then you can select an image and you can tag them with that keyword, and then there'll be a little tagged keyword tag right here too. You can also edit directly here. So now moving on to some of the views. So grid view is a viewing mode where multiple images are displayed as thumbnails in a grid. This view is useful to see and select from a collection of images, especially useful during sorting or culling processes. And then we have Loupe View. So Loupe View is a viewing mode in Lightroom where a single image is displayed prominently, allowing for closer examination. This is useful when you want to focus on one image, especially for detailed review or editing. Then you have survey mode. Survey mode is a view mode that allows you to compare multiple images and multiple photos side by side to choose the best one. You'll want to use this view when deciding between similar shots to determine which one is best for editing or delivering to a client. Now, when you're in the develop module, you have reference view where you can drag in a reference photo, and then you have them side by side, kind of similar to how it was in survey view, aiding in matching the look between the two. Next up we have stacking, and stacking is a method of grouping similar photos together so they occupy a single grid cell. This reduces visual clutter. You want to stack when you want to organize photos from like burst shots, bracketed exposures, or any group of similar photos. So you can just create a stack here, and then you can open up the stack, and then you can also unstack the photos. Next up you have soft proofing, and soft proofing simulates how your photo will look when printed on specific paper or displayed on other devices. This is useful for before printing or exporting for specific devices to ensure color accuracy and desired appearances. Next you have the catalog, and the catalog is the database where Lightroom stores information about all your photos, including previews and the edits you make. The catalog is there to organize, manage, and track all your edits and photos in one central place. And beginners should understand the importance of not losing their catalog and backing it up regularly. And finally, we have the Navigator. The Navigator is a small preview window in the top left corner that shows which part of your image is currently visible, especially useful when zoomed in. You can adjust it from fit to fill to zoom in on your photo and get some closer looks at it. It's used to quickly navigate to different parts of a zoomed image as well. And you can adjust different percentages. And that's it. 50 plus Lightroom editing terms you should know. Thanks for watching.